Today's Deep Dive, we take a look at the Tea Party and white evangelical voters, two critical conservative groups who aren't obvious allies at the surface, but have forged an interesting and powerful partnership. Here's the political primer. Tea Party focuses on fiscal responsibility and limited government. White evangelicals put their priority in social issues and spreading their faith. White evangelical voters have been part of the political conversations for a couple of decades, 78% coming out for George W. Bush in 2004. And they were a full 23% of the entire U.S. electorate. That voter group grew in 2008, but then Senator Obama made actually a small dent in an otherwise big gap. The current president won over 60% of the remaining electorate. And the Tea Party came onto the scene in 2009 and 2010 with some of their lawmaker leaders inside and outside the Beltway having an evangelical background. But the big question right now, will these voters show up in droves for Mitt Romney this November? Romney had trouble gaining traction with both groups early on. A laundry list of primary candidates grabbed their attention till they settled on Rick Santorum, propelling him to nearly a dozen victories before he stepped aside. Good news for the president's opponent. A recent Brookings Institute survey shows his Mormon faith didn't prevent likely evangelical supporters from voting for him, and his faith is more accepted when its links to Christianity are explained. And then there's a stronger network of evangelical conservatives prepared to mobilize millions of voters for what should be a close election. We're going to talk more about these connections between these groups with David Brody. He's the senior national correspondent for the Christian Broadcasting Network, and he's the author of a new book called The Teavangelicals, inside story of how evangelicals and the Tea Party are taking back America. And it was an alliance, and forgive me for using this phrase, an unholy alliance, if you will, for a while, because evangelicals and the Tea Party were not talking about the same issues. And for a long time, there was actually some anxiety amongst some evangelical leaders that's saying moral issues were being pushed aside.
Well, and what's interesting here, these Teavangelicals, really they have a lot in common, and there's a sense here that evangelicals are out to kind of co-opt this Tea Party movement, but it really isn't true. I mean, if you look inside the numbers, about 60% of the Tea Party is social conservative. You know, these, 50 to 60% are conservative Christians. So if there was going to be any attempt, Chuck, to co-opt this movement, it probably would have happened.
But it goes to the other 40%. That's what some will say is that, so what is the mix of social issues and not? I mean, I think about the Values Voters Summit, the various summits that there were, and the complaint would be about Mitt Romney. He's not talking about any moral issues. And what made Rick Santorum appealing at the end is he was somebody that had credibility with social conservatives talking about fiscals. He was trying to marry these two constituency groups because the thought was you win a majority of both of them, you get the Republican nomination, which turned out not to be true.
Well, and it's something I write about in the book, about look how far Santorum went because of that Teavangelical message. I mean,
he needed the social conservative message to be married to the fiscal.
That's right, and he was able to do it, and that's one of the reasons why I point out why conservative Christians are breaking bread with these Tea Party libertarians, because they're able to combine fiscal issues and social issues, but it doesn't have to be life and marriage. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the morality of the debt. We're talking about a good person will leave an inheritance to their children's children, it says in the Bible. So they'll take it from a biblical view and make the fiscal issues biblical, if you will.
All right. Mitt Romney's, it seems like he has the same like affair, if you will, with this group of voters that Speaker Boehner was speaking about. I mean, it was sort of that quote, and it was interesting to me of all days I have you on for this, and here's Speaker Boehner saying, Mitt Romney has some friends, relatives, and fellow Mormons, some people that are going to go out there and vote for him, but that's not what this election is about. Obviously, being anti-Obama motivates these voters, but do they have to get to a point where they fall in like with Mitt Romney?
They are not going to necessarily be there completely with Romney, but I think this is a raw vote total issue. And as you know, Chuck, with these numbers, I don't think it's so much about the percentage of the evangelical vote that'll show up for Romney, whether it be 73%, I think that was McCain's number, and Bush had a bigger number in 2004. I think it's about raw vote total. In other words, can folks like Ralph Reed's group, this Teavangelical group, the Faith and Freedom Coalition, can they get more folks to the polls, more Teavangelical voters to the polls? Ralph Reed believes he can get 3 million more Teavangelical type voters to the poll. I mean, if that's the case, I mean, that puts a whole different spin on what could happen potentially. It really is more about not the folks that are going to actually show up and vote for Romney. For example, the Santorum folks, the Kane folks, all those folks that voted for those folks, they'll vote for Romney. That's not the issue. The question is, will they bring a friend and will they mobilize? And I think that's really important.
Does Romney have to do another Mormon speech?
You just came right out and asked it, didn't you?
Yeah.
You know, he's not going to. I think that's been there.
Okay, we'll set that aside.
Yeah, set that aside.
Do you think he needs to? Are there still some evangelicals who wish that he would make a better case?
You know, I don't think he needs to do an evangelical speech, but here's what he does need to do. He definitely needs to talk more about how his faith informs his views because, and he can go generic on this if he wants, but to connect with voters. He has a sense of, as a bishop there within the Mormon church, that he really was able to humanize and talk to people about counseling women out of abortions or whatever the case may be. And I think a lot of that is extremely important for him to be able to connect with voters, and but he just won't go there.
Is there a significant chunk of evangelicals who won't vote for Mitt Romney?
There's a small chunk.
When you say small, what does that mean?
It could be, well, first of all, Pew's number is anywhere around 15% or so. Now, having said that, let's look geographically, and not to stereotype here, but it seems like the anti-Mormon contingent may be more geographically situated in states that Romney is going to, in states that Romney is going to win anyhow. So whether or not it becomes more of a factor, I'm not convinced that it is.
Does this become, if he becomes president, does it become a governing factor? Is that something he's got to be?
No, I don't think so. At least that's not the talk within evangelical circles. I don't think that's the case at all.
All right. You coined the term Teavangelicals, and you turned it into a book. Congratulations on it. We'll have folks should look at it. It's an interesting way to look at the electorate and realize, as you say, the margins matter, but the chunk of the electorate matters as well. David Brody, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Joe.
Our political panel is here next to kick off the week. We're digging into some new battleground polls.